Om Ajnanatimidandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurun Militam Dhena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namah. And here's a mantra of respect to the author of this book, actually the compiler, the one who put it together. And there's a lot of storyline in the book in the very beginning about Srila Vyasadeva, Srila Dvaipayana Vyas, who compiled this book after seeing the contents of it when he went into trance. So this is not ordinary speech that's in this book. It's called Samadhi Bhasha. Bhasha means speech. But after his Samadhi, which means he was fully absorbed in meditation and he was able to see the spiritual world for himself and have all the conclusive knowledge about self-realization. And so after he saw it, then he wrote it down in this book called the Srimad Bhagavatam. So this next one I'll say, and then you can repeat, and it honors Srila Vyasadeva, the author. So we do that before we start. Narayanam namaskritya naram chaiva narottamam devim sarasatim vyasam tato jayam udiraye. And now we'll turn to today's verse, which is in the third canto out of 12, 3 out of 12. And this chapter, which is 26, is called Fundamental Principles of Material Nature. So there's a lot of detail about the constitution of the material world and how it works in the Srimad Bhagavatam. And this is a part of a spiritual knowledge called Sambandha Gyan, because it's a good idea to know our environment and know what it's constituted of, and also how we got here, and the way to extricate oneself from it, to have very clear understanding. In this section of the Bhagavatam, there's an ongoing description of the world and its relationship with its origin, who is Krishna, actually. And Krishna manifests the world, but it's actually not separate from him. And this point is made early on in the Srimad Bhagavatam when Shukadeva Goswami meets his student, Parikshit Maharaj. He begins to point out that the world actually that we see around us, like this is a good place to look at the world here around Denver, because there are a lot of natural landmarks that are impressive. Which ones would you say are the best? The mountains. Yeah, so when you look at the mountains, then Shukadeva Goswami told Parikshit Maharaj, you should see on the universal body of the Lord that it's actually, these are the stacks of his bones. And how about the rivers? Rivers are the veins of the universal form of the Lord. So he was going through all the different aspects of the material creation and pointing out that these are various features or qualities of the Supreme Personality of God in himself, bringing his student to the point of appreciating that there's a person behind everything. Without that, gratitude doesn't make any sense. Because when you're grateful really because there's something that's been thoughtful has been done for you. And thoughtfulness means intelligence. Deliberate activities were performed to benefit you in some way. And if it's deliberate, it means there's a person, there was intention, it means consciousness. You see where he's taking him? He's showing them all the different aspects of the creation and seeing this is actually personal. It emanates from a person, there's a person behind that, and you can actually see within nature that there's a personal aspect to this. Or rather, he's telling him, you should see it like that. And he also points out throughout the Bhagavatam how well planned out the material world is, and catalogs the various kinds of species that are here in this world. And also talks extensively about how material nature works, including the atomic particles, how they come together, how they break apart at certain times, and all the elements that constitute this material world. In the Gita, Krishna gives a summary of this where he says, Bhumir apo analolav ayu kamano bhudirevacha ahankara ityame binna prakritirashtada. He names the basic energies of this material world. Here's what he says. Earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, and false ego. So this last list sounds a little funny, doesn't it? Ether, mind. Do you think of mind as a material element? It's on the list, so. Yeah, it's on the list of material elements. Bina Prakriti, he calls it my separated energy. And these are the subtle material energies. Kind of like software. And you say, what is software anyway? It's an energy. What kind of energy it is. I remember my father, who was just on the cusp of the computer revolution. He kept asking me, well, where is it? Where is that information? I mean, where is it kept? It's subtle. It's stored somewhere. And there's a hard drive. And if you look at your own body, you'll see that the body is really like the hard drive. And then the mind stuff, the subtle energy, is like the software that runs it. So that in composite, in aggregate, is the list of the material elements. And then Krishna says, Aparayam itasthanyam prakritim vidimi param. Jiva bhutam mahabaho yayedam daryate jagat. This is important. He said, besides these gross and subtle elements, which are material, there's an energy that animates the whole world that's categorically different from any of the elements we just mentioned. It doesn't act the same. You cannot circumscribe that energy. You cannot describe it with a physical formula. It's wondrous. It doesn't have the same properties at all that the material elements have, even the most subtle ones. It's very different. So he says that's what you're made of. And what we call the external body and the mind, that's made up of these material elements, both gross and subtle. And in essence, I'm encased in a body, or more metaphorically, I'm riding in a body. It's like a car. And I'm the one ostensibly who's driving it. Actually, I'm not the primary driver. I desire certain things. Examples given by Burjan Prabhu in the Bhagavad Gita. We talk about who's actually doing things. And he said, just like a little child, he may see his father lifting weights, and then he goes in and he's just a little toddler, but he puts his hand on the barbell. He's like, and his father's standing behind him, and so he actually lifts up the weights. But the kid's thinking, I'm lifting this. I'm picking it up. So there's an arrangement in nature, whatever ways in which we desire to move here and there, there's a chain of command arrangement so that we can make those movements move about the world in certain ways. And these are all provided to us by material nature. It's a very sophisticated technological device, the material body, and we're the one behind it that animates it. As soon as the body leaves, then the machine no longer works, nor is it valuable in any way. That's why people burn it, bury it, they get rid of it, just after the conscious living being who's spiritual leaves the body. So, in today's verse, we have the words Shrut pipase tata syatam samudras tvetayor abhut atasya hridayam binnam hridayan mana utitam. So some of the verses in the Bhagavatam, when you take them by themselves, may sound sort of obscure, and this is probably going to be one of them. So I'm trying to build a little context around it. But let's listen to the word for word, and then we'll get into a discussion about what this verse means in context. Does that sound fair?
Yes.
Say yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Shut pipase, you repeat.
Shut pipase.
Hunger and thirst.
Hunger and thirst.
Tata.
Tata.
Then. Syatam.
Syatam.
Appeared. Samudra. The ocean. Two. Then. Etayo. In their wake. Abhut. Appeared. Ata. Then. Asya. Of the universal form. Hridayam. A heart. Binnam. Appeared. Hridayat. From the heart. Mana. The mind. Utitam. Appeared. Here's the translation. Next grew feelings of hunger and thirst, and in their wake came the manifestation of the oceans. Then a heart became manifest, and in the wake of the heart the mind appeared. Purport. The ocean is considered to be the presiding deity of the abdomen, where the feelings of hunger and thirst originate. When there is an irregularity in hunger and thirst, one is advised, according to Ayurvedic treatment, to take bath in the ocean. So this section of the Bhagavatam is describing the interconnectedness of the creator of the world and the living beings who are part and parcel of the creator. That's worth explaining. There's original source of everything. In fact, the definition given of God in the Vedas, the books of wisdom, is Janmadyasayataha, which means God is that from whom everything else emanates. Everything. And to make things simple, some of the special books that describe what's in the Vedas and try to give more context to them, one of them is called the Padma Purana, speaks about the three categories of energy. Vishnu Shakti Paraprokta Kshetra Gyakya Tatapara Avidya Karma Samgyanya Tritiya Shaktir Uchate. So Uchate means it is said that there are three major categories of energies that come from the original source of everything, Krishna. So one of those is called the internal potency. That's spiritual, purely spiritual energy. And it's unencumbered by any kind of contaminated consciousness. That's what the spiritual world is made of. And then there's the external world. If you were to put a tangerine in your hand and look at it and say, okay, where's the tangerine? You say, it's right in my hand, I'm pointing to it now. And they say, peel the tangerine. So you throw the peels on the floor, and then you're holding the tangerine, say, point to the tangerine now. You still point to the tangerine in your hand. You say, what about the peels? So the peel is kind of like the external part, which is, it's all part of the same tangerine, but it's the external energy. The internal energy is the internal part. But then where do we come in this equation? Because we didn't name us, the living entities. So it's distinguishing in this verse that there's external energy, internal energy, and now we have a special designation. Yay! And that's called tatasta, which means that we're called marginal energy. Means that we can identify either with the internal energy or the external energy. And in a very simple way, there's a description of that a way in which we can understand our constitutional position, our eternal nature as spiritual beings. We're like sparks. You know when you have a big bonfire and sparks come from it? Say yes.
Yes.
And then you look at the sparks and look at the fire, and are they the same?
Yeah.
Who said yes? Yes. Anybody want to say no? No. So yes and no. Both are correct answers. Because if you take a spark, you wouldn't say it is the fire, you'd say it's a spark. At the same time, you're right, it is part of the fire, so it is fire. It has the same qualities as the fire. But if you look at it, it's separated. I'm sorry?
It's powerful enough to create a huge fire.
Yeah, that's true. It can. But according to Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, there's a way in which the spark always remains a spark and the fire is always the fire. Even if a spark does land on some dry grass and starts another fire. But that's extending the metaphors. Metaphors don't always work perfectly, right? But for the sake of understanding our nature, we're fire-like. We have the same qualities as our original source. But in quantity, we're different. The fire is huge, and in this case, when we're talking about the Supreme, unlimited. And although we have the same qualities, our nature is that we're tiny, and we're dependent. That's another difference, because the Supreme is called Swarat. He's independent. Is anybody here completely independent? Just independently wealthy, because I want to talk to you afterwards if you want. Even that's hard to attain, independently wealthy. People all the time, they get wealth, but they depend on other people. And we call the people around us relatives because it's relative to a certain situation. And we don't have absolute control over anything in our lives, really. If you examine it carefully, and coming to this conclusion, and the attitude that describes is called akinchana, which means I don't have anything. I really don't have much control at all. But what we do have is a similar nature in that we have spiritual quality and we have free will. It means that we can decide at any moment where to place our attention. That's a power given to us eternally, that we can reside wherever we wish, we can place our attention anywhere we wish. And so this verse describes the three kinds of energies: the internal, which describes the spiritual world, and then the material world, the external world, which is still part of God, but it's considered to be external or separated. And the third energy is the living entity. That's us, the soul that animates this body. So you are the soul, or the spirit, or it's called in Sanskrit the Atma, that resides within the area of the heart, around the heart chakra, that animates the body. And you have the quality of consciousness. So now, about the external world, in this chapter, we're hearing about how there's an interrelational quality between everything here in this world because it emanates from a common source. And there are even ways in which, in the Ayurveda, which is mentioned in several places, like in this verse and in the previous verse, which talked about rivers and how if you're having a problem with circulation, you go bathe in a river. If you're having trouble with digestion, go swim in the ocean, and so forth. And these have to do with the fact that the energies of the Supreme Personality of Godhead that are manifest in this external world are all interconnected in very specific ways. And when we consider the ways in which they're connected, we can understand also how they're dependent on their original source as well. That's also what's being described here. In other words, how is it that the material worlds manifest? It starts with the Supreme, the person who manifests everything. And through his desires, the various entities are manifest in the material world. And so we have here again the hunger and thirst. In their wake came the manifestations of the ocean. Then a heart became manifest, and in the wake of the heart, the mind appeared. And you find this throughout this chapter and other places in the Srimad Bhagavatam about the ways in which various kinds of manifestations emanate originally from Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they sort of telescope out according to their original purpose and the desire behind them into manifestations in this world. And that brings us to what Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita as the devas. So there are entities in the material world, throughout the material world, that help to regulate. Can someone open one more window maybe? It's already open? One on each side, scientific. There are devas who also emanate from the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and they're given specific powers to help regulate the material world so that it works properly. It's something I thought of one day. Well, I mean, I've thought of it before, but I thought of it kind of profoundly once when I was sitting at our ashram in Govardhan. And every day there at Govardhan Hill, we sit down for prasadam. And we're in a hallway where many devotees line up and sit down in lines, and somebody comes and serves us prasadam. And every day the prasadam is phenomenal. And we enjoy sitting together, singing songs, taking prasadam. And then I realized I have no idea who cooked this. Not only don't I know who cooked it, I don't even know where the kitchen is. And I was considering that. I was just sitting there, that it's possible. In fact, I was kind of on the borderline of thinking like this, that like this just happens by accident. Because, you can take it for granted and just, I sit down, they bring the food. And that's what most people think in this world. I'm breathing air, it's just there. Of course it's there. Or there's water. But, of course, we have practical experience. Those who are homeowners know that if you leave the lights on, then at the end of the month you get a little letter in the mail that asks you to pay for it. And so I was thinking I should go find out who cooks. And I went and I looked inside, and lo and behold, there were actual people in there. And they had 2 arms, 2 legs, hands, eyes, everything. And they had implements of cooking. They were cooking all kinds of stuff, moving around. They were happy to see me too, because not many people stick their head in there and appreciate them. But it changed my relationship altogether. And when I'd sit down the next day, I was thinking more about where this came from. So these types of descriptions throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam, again in the spirit of the way in which Shukadeva Goswami was teaching Parikshit from the very beginning, to take things very personally. Don't just think it's happening automatically. Try to trace it out and find out who's the origin behind this. Is there a benefactor from whom we're actually receiving gifts constantly? And in the Gita, Krishna says resoundingly, yes, there are. He said, first of all, there are these devas. They're doing a lot of work for you. And in fact, in the Srimad Bhagavatam, it says, Devarshi Bhuta Mandarinam Pitranam Nakin Karunayam Ranicharajam Saravatmanaya Sharanam Sharanyam Gato Mukundam Parihrita Kartam. Everyone born into this world is a rini, which means a debtor. You owe all these people. And then he names the devas, the rishis, the spiritual knowledge that one gets that is coming down to us seemingly for free. And then there's lots of living entities we depend upon for our sustenance in this world. And barely do we ever give them thanks. There's not a day, a national day of thanks to the cow. Although people all over the world eat ice cream, they don't give it another thought. Where did that come from? Right?
Yes.
I remember a class that Mahatma Prabhu gave in San Francisco. I think it was like 1974. And he was saying, so there's a cow, and it gives milk. You put grass in front of it, it eats grass, and milk comes out, and he goes, who thought of that? I thought, that's a good point. And so the bhakti is the yoga of gratitude, of understanding how everything's coming to us, how we're interconnected, we're directly connected with the Supreme. And the verse I just quoted goes on to say, although you're a debtor to all these people, entities everywhere, that if you realize that, you become an enlightened person. Sarvatmana ya sharanam sharanyam. And you give yourself in service to the origin of everything. And you say, I understand, actually. I'm the beneficiary, and I understand several things. One thing is that I should have gratitude. And out of gratitude, I'm moved. What's the next thing that happens when you're moved through gratitude? You want to do something for the person. And that's what devotional service means. It means to move about the world in a different way. I'm not moving for myself anymore. I'm moving to serve the divine source of everything, who's my well-wisher in all ways. And the verse goes on to say, such a person is no longer a debtor. All your debts are cleared. If that's your life, if that's your intention, if that's why you're moving, you're no longer obligated to anything in this world. So now we'll take a few reflections or questions, for which we have 7 minutes left. Hare Krishna.
Your class is reminding me of a particular section in the 7th chapter of the Gita, when Krishna talks about how he's the basis of the modes of nature, the source of everything, many verses. And one of the acharyas pointed out something very fascinating, that if you are everything, then why can we not know you through the manifestation of this world? Krishna says, well, actually, if you try to know me just through the world, you will become deluded, because that's just the nature of this reality. And I would like to hear your thoughts on this particular point, because I've been thinking about how when we live in this world, we want to discover a sense of flow. Who are we materially? And how can we engage with the world in a state of flow? But we also hear from the Bhakti Shastras that when you have a conscious intent, that can deconstruct the whole material reality. So even though you're entangled in matter, because of your conscious intent and the way you engage with the world, you may not become entangled in it. So I was wondering if you could speak a little bit about this balance between finding your state of flow, but also having a conscious intent at the same time.
One of the famous verses of the Srimad Bhagavatam describes the reason that I become morose or depressed or unmotivated, or in general that I feel darkness, the dark energy in my life. Where does it actually come from? And it's through misuse of intent, because of a misunderstanding. Really, it comes down to misalignment. When I don't have clear knowledge about my relationship with my original divine source, then I misplace my energy. And by that very act of misplacing my energy and my intentions, then I'm enveloped by a lower kind of energy. So the verse says, Ratirtam yat pratyeta na pratyeta chatmani tad vidyadat manomayam yatabhaso yatatamaha. And in this, Krishna is actually speaking to Brahma. And he says that anything that you see in this world that you discern is different from me, different from the original divine source, know that to be my illusory energy. So that's an interesting concept. Everything actually comes from the Supreme and is connected to the Supreme, as we're hearing here. But somehow or other I misconstrue things, I become misaligned. And I think that they don't have some connection. I don't see the connection. And when I don't see the connection, I get what's called a Maya energy, which is illusory. And in that state of illusion, I am not productive at all. And I'm feeling needy, and I'm feeling disconnected from my original source, and that creates fear. The Bhagavatam says, Bhayam dvitiya vinibeshatasya ishad apetasya viparya yosmiti. This kind of attitude of not seeing and feeling gratitude for how everything's connected to the original divine source. This is called Aparyosmiti means that you're wrong-headed. Means you've got things reversed. And the implication there is that you look at things and you think, these are for me. Rather than thinking that this is for service and I see the connection out of gratitude, I want to engage it, then I think that let me keep it, let me enjoy it. When I first took an economics class, the first thing I noticed was they said economics is based on the law of scarcity. Scarce resources, that's where supply and demand come from. And management of scarce resources. And there's a kind of one living entity feeds on another in the material energy. It's a very exploitative environment, the material world, because everyone's thinking, let me have it. And therefore there's scarcity. Everyone's fighting over some resource. And from that, bhayam dvitiya binibeshita syad, fear arises because I think that I'm not going to have enough. Or that whatever I have, I'm going to lose at any second. But when one's properly aligned and sees things as they are, that actually we're part of Krishna, and our only duty really is to render some kind of a service, which is extremely fulfilling, unlimitedly fulfilling. And that when that's my intention, then the situation becomes rectified. In fact, in a very practical way, I know that when I became a grihastha, there were various decisions I had to make that I didn't have to make before. I was living with my parents until I was 16, and then I flew the coop, and I became a brahmachari. And when I was around 16, and then I lived in the brahmachari ashram for 13 years. I didn't have a credit card, let's speak of a car, or a bank account, or any money, or anything. Actually, I was fine. My friends thought it was funny because, when I left high school, they said, are you crazy? And, what's going to happen to you? And by the time I saw them the next time, I had been around the world about 5 times and was living kind of like a pretty opulent lifestyle for not having anything. In any case, when I became a grihastha, and I realized that you actually have to pay for stuff. That was a revelation. Where was I going with that? I got so absorbed in the story. The fact was that...
Not being prepared? Or you didn't have a...
Yeah. I'm sorry.
When you became a grihastha...
It was a fun story anyway. What?
You were saying when you became a grihastha...
Yeah, decisions to make. I kind of lost the track. It'll probably... What?
Scarce resources?
Yeah, scarce resources. Anyway, it'll come back. Yes.
Thank you so much for class. I was appreciating the point about personalism, so I was thinking how when you see everything personally, then also you realize that you're never alone. And also that when you start to depersonalize things, then you start to lose respect and compassion for animals and other people, like for example racism, and you start to lose respect for taking care of the environment, the rivers, the trees.
Yeah, that's a good point. I just give you an instance that everyone can probably relate to, where you'll notice the difference between personal consciousness and impersonal consciousness. Impersonal means that you don't know who's behind it. And personal consciousness means you know who's behind it and how it changes everything. Should I say it?
Yes.
Okay, hopefully I won't forget. Okay, so say you're driving your car and somebody who's either a bad driver or is just in general obnoxious and drives to agitate other people. And is this possible that you'll meet somebody on the motorway that will disturb you by the way they're driving?
Yes.
Okay. What would be an instance of that? Cutting you off. Yeah. Okay. So everyone said cutting you off. So that goes to the top of the list. Okay. Let's just say you get cut off when you're driving down Cherry Street. Someone unceremoniously cuts you off, and then what might be a possible reaction, not for you, but for like an ordinary person? You could honk, and any feeling behind that honking? Anger. Road rage, which is, there are a lot of different ways, and some words can come out of your mouth, your whole, and road rage can lead to a lot of serious problems. I mean, you might chase after them and try to, well, let's just say you get really angry and you're uttering some expletives, and then all of a sudden you see, the car, and you look and you go, it's Tushta driving. And he was trying to let you know you left your bead bag back at the temple. He was like speeding up to try to pull up with you. Then how do you feel? Well, first of all, embarrassed, and then you scale everything back as you go. Oh, it's Tushta. Of course, I'm not angry, because it's personalized. Or if it's your mother, it's like, hey, mom, come on, be careful. But if you don't know who it is, or even if it's a stranger, if you got to know who it was, then you change your relationship. The relationship would change. And so, as you're pointing out, Radhesham, if I have this amorphous understanding of the world, it's just happening. It happened by chance. There's no connection to anything. I may be disrespectful to the whole environment. What does it matter? It doesn't come from anywhere. It doesn't belong to anybody. It's just here. Whatever you can grab. Law of supply and demand. That's what runs everything anyway. Prabhu.
Just to Radhesham's point, I read this morning in the introduction of Bhagavad Gita. Srila Prabhupada writes, he's speaking about the constitutional nature of living entity in Dharma, Sanatana Dharma. He says, Dharma refers to that which is constantly existing with a particular object. We conclude that there is heat and light along with fire. Without heat and light, there is no meaning to the word fire. Similarly, we must discover the essential part of the living being, that part which is his constant companion. That constant companion is his eternal quality, and that eternal quality is his eternal religion. So I like this point that Radhesham's was saying about we can begin to feel lonely when we have this impersonal consciousness, but seeing that nature, that relationship that we have is the constant companion, that we have this constant companion. Not only is it Krishna in the heart, but then bhakti is also personal, and our relationship with Krishna is always with us.
Such a nice point. Thank you for bringing that out of the Bhagavad Gita introduction. Amazing. Okay, Rasika, Prabhu.
So those last two comments just kind of sparked for me the instructions that Lord Krishna gives to Uddhava in the 11th canto, where Uddhava is lamenting that the Lord's about to leave, but he can't go with him right away. And so the Lord tells him that if he will work on recognizing that he's inside of every living entity, and that every living entity is also spiritually within the heart, a part and parcel of himself, and learn to give honor to every single living entity, knowing that that living entity is a part and parcel of Krishna, and that Krishna is also there in the heart of that person, that he'll never be bereft of the Lord's presence.
Oh yeah, that's a really important section and a point. Thank you. I just, yes, one last point and then I'll close the class. Please.
I'm a Radhe Shamshin in Prabhu. I find that with the practice of ahimsa, when you start ahimsa internally and you seem to begin to master it, then that's whenever ahimsa transmits to the outer world, to everyone, because you realize that you can grasp more your connection with Krishna, and then you stop hurting yourself, and once you can really stop hurting yourself with the things that you say and the things that you do and the habits that you create in your life, then if you really have a firm grasp on that, then it starts to just boil over into the rest of the world. You have a hard time being mean, you have a hard time getting angry in that car when you get cut off, because you realize your connection with Krishna, and then that is your connection with everyone else as well. So
Yes, it's an excellent point. It's one that's made in various places one of them is in the Sri Upanishad, which says, Yastu sarvani bhutani atmani vanu pashyati sarva bhuteshu chatmanam tato nava jigupsate. One who sees everything in relation to the Supreme Lord and sees the Supreme Lord within everything, never hates any being, anything or any being. And so a final point to go away with, in this verse, hopefully this is practical. It's kind of a meditation that you can keep as you go away in connecting with our original divine source, Krishna. And the digestion process is mentioned here. How many of you are thinking about digestion right now? Okay, you gotta go. So, after you eat, how many of you think about digestion, and how many do you worry about it and think about how the enzymes are being broken down and sent to different parts of the body? One person, only Radhesham worries about it. Actually, we don't really think about it. We just eat, and it happens automatically. And we really enjoy it. In fact, we've found that the thing most living entities like most is eating. We had programs at our house for several years, and when Nirkula really started cooking in an opulent way, then we had more than we could handle. They come from every direction. So in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, Aham Vaishvanaro Bhutva, that I am the fire of digestion within the stomach of every living entity. And Prabhupada points out, when he talks about this, it's a subtle energy that actually digests everything. And that's the energy of Krishna that makes that happen. And therefore, as a meditation, realizing that actually, just think of that one place where if it's interrupted even just for a day, you can't enjoy life. You can't be in alignment with all the other things you need to do or anything. But Krishna says, I'm doing that for you. And if you went and cataloged all the ways in which he was helping, you would never come to the end of it because we're fully dependent. But just think about the digestion. And it was at a forest called Naimisharanya. And there were thousands of sages assembled there. And they spent a little longer than us because they were there for 1,000 years to hear. That's a long seminar. But at least we tried, and we came for 1 hour. And we had some discussion about the Bhagavad Gita, and according to the Gita, about the Bhagavatam. And about the Bhagavatam says that getting together for these kinds of things live and in person is very important. And it's also nice that devotees joined us. It was almost the same experience, pretty close, from the internet. So everyone please turn toward the camera and thank all our brethren from around the world who joined us. A little more, come on. Let them know you care here in Denver. Let them know you care. That's right. Thank you very much. Gaur Premanande. Nitai Gaura Haribo. 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 Nitai Gaura Haribo. Nitai Gaura Haribo. Haribo. Nitai Gaura Haribo.
Natari Armarman, Natari Armarman, Natari Armarman, hey, Natari Armarman, Natari Armarman, Natari Armarman, Natari Armarman.